Welcome students to part 2 of chapter 1 communication course. Right, in part 1 we looked at the definition of communication and the models. So we will continue by looking at what is an effective communicator, or who is an effective communicator. And it's the person who's aware or pays attention when they communicate. They will encode and decode messages accurately. In other words, they will make their message understood by using words the other person can understand. Now, let's look at the 5 principles of communication for a lifetime. Principle number 1, be aware of your communication with yourself and others. Number 2, effectively use and interpret verbal messages. Number 3, effectively use and interpret non-verbal messages. Listen and respond thoughtfully, and appropriately adapt messages to others. We'll look at these one by one. Principle number 1 is to be aware of communication with yourself and others. So communication with yourself is what we call intrapersonal communication. It's your thoughts. And communication with others is what we call interpersonal communication. Intrapersonal communication, interpersonal communication. Principle number 2 is to effectively use and interpret verbal messages. Now we use language to create verbal messages so that we can communicate and be understood. Principle number 3 is to effectively use and interpret non-verbal messages. Now, non-verbal messages are messages that are not spoken. In other words, body language, listening by tilting the head, reaching out your hand, like these two gentlemen, to shake hands. That's body language, and you need to be aware of it and use it effectively. Now, when you use body language effectively, it increases trust, like shaking of hands. Principle number 4 is to listen. Now, communication is a transactional process. That word simply means an exchange of information, where both sender and receiver respond to verbal and non-verbal signals, the words and the actions. Very important. And finally, it's important to adapt your message to others. So you don't just listen, but you adapt your response. In other words, this gentleman is nodding his head to agree with what this guy has said. And so he's adapting his response to say, I agree with you. I like what you're saying. Please continue. Now, there are 3 contexts to communication. In other words, where it happens. Context, the things around a place. We get interpersonal communication. We've learned that word, group and presentational. Interpersonal communication, the context of interpersonal communication is between people. So it's verbal and non-verbal messages, face-to-face communication. And it's important that for successful interpersonal communication, messages must be sent and are received and understood. Interpersonal communication. Now we get group communication, and that is, for example, a working group at a business or a project team. And a group is a collection of people who have common goals. In other words, they want to achieve something together. Another example of group communication will be a football team when they sit down and plan the game, how they're going to play the game and try to win it. The last context of communication is what we call presentational, and that is a presentation is where you speak to a large group. For example, this picture shows a TED talk, very famous professional talks, and that is a talk to inform, or like a business presentation is to persuade people. And that is presentational, where one person, the person up front, will give a presentation on a topic. Right, that's the end of chapter 1. Please take a screenshot of the quiz, answer all the questions, and bring them to class so that we can review Chapter 1. There are 3 true-false questions. Please read them and go through the slides to answer the questions. That's the end of Chapter 1.